what in the hell is the world thinking? Martin, let me ask you a question. If you really thought to yourself that somebody like Trump could actually be president, what do you think would be the first thing that would happen? The moment that he steps into that office, the moment that he steps into the Oval Office, and the moment that he takes his chair, sits down, and actually has the opportunity to be able to pick up that phone, who do you think would be the first person that he would call? What do you think he would say to that person? What kinds of decisions do you think he would make in the first 100 days? You know, a lot of times they say that a president can be judged as to the kinds of actions, the kinds of activities that, or the kinds of decisions that he makes in his first 100 days. What do you think exactly would be those kinds of decisions? Do you think he would actually go through with the kinds of things that he said during his entire campaign about putting up a wall, about doing more business with Putin, actually showing admiration for certain dictators that have existed over the course of history, actually deporting almost 11 million immigrants almost immediately out of the United States, making Mexico pay for that wall, abandoning NATO, abandoning our allies, abandoning Germany, Japan, and France, just because he says that those countries don't pay. I don't know. What do you think? This is your first activity. To let me know exactly in the first 100 days what kinds of decisions a person like Donald Trump would make. And not just Donald Trump, let's include Hillary too. Now, as you already know, I'm a very avid Hillary supporter. So that's your first activity for this video. In the first 100 days, what kinds of decisions would Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton make in the first 100 days if they were president of the United States? Now let's go on to our second activity.
Today's Republican Party opposes big government. It's culturally conservative. Its demographic support is strongest among white voters, and it usually dominates elections in the South. The party's 2016 presidential nominee has been heavily criticized for inciting racial tensions. But things weren't always this way. Over the past 160 years or so, the party has undergone a remarkable transformation from the party of Abraham Lincoln to the party of Donald Trump. To understand how the GOP got this way, you have to go back to when it first came into existence in 1854, just 7 years before the Civil War. There are two parties at this point, the Whigs and the Democrats. America is quickly expanding westward, and there's an intense debate over whether or not new states should permit slavery. The Democratic Party, with strong support in the South, has become increasingly pro-slavery. But the Whigs are divided on the issue. Their northern supporters are really afraid that the growing number of slave states would have too much political influence, which they feared could really hurt free white workers economically. So in 1854, the country is debating whether or not the territories of Kansas and Nebraska should allow slavery. The Whigs can't agree, and the party ends up collapsing. The former Whigs in the North form a new party that will fight against letting slavery expand any further. They call it the Republican Party. By 1860, the Republican Party has become increasingly powerful in the North, enough so that a little-known Republican named Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency. Even though Lincoln promises he won't interfere with slavery in states that already have it, he and his party are still too anti-slavery for the South to tolerate. So 11 southern states secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The northern states decide to fight to keep the Union together, and the Civil War ensues. The result is a northern victory and the abolition of slavery nationwide. After the war, Republicans begin fighting to ensure that recently freed slaves in the South have their rights. A year after Lincoln's assassination, the party passes the Civil Rights Act of 1866. They fight to make sure that black men have the same right to vote with new laws and constitutional amendments. But something had happened during the Civil War that began changing the young Republican Party. Government spending during the war made many northern businessmen really rich. Gradually, these wealthy financiers and industrialists start taking more and more of a leadership role in the Republican Party. They want to hold on to power, and they don't think that fighting for black rights in a mostly white country is the best way to do that. Meanwhile, the South is resisting these new racial reforms, often violently, and most white Republican voters and leaders now feel that they've done enough for black citizens in the South, and it's time to emphasize other issues. So in 1870, the party basically gives up on reforming the South, deciding instead to leave it to its own devices. the region becomes politically dominated by white Democrats. Fast forward to the new century. By the 1920s, the Republican Party has become essentially the party of big business. This works out quite well for them as the economy is booming, but not so well when the economy crashes in 1929 and the Great Depression begins. Franklin D. Roosevelt and other Democrats are swept into power and begin dramatically expanding the size and role of the federal government in an attempt to fight the Depression and better provide for Americans. Republicans oppose this rapid expansion, defining themselves as opposition to big government, an identity that the party still holds today. Going into the 50s and 60s, race and the South returned to the forefront of national politics, with the civil rights movement attempting to end segregation and ensure blacks truly have the right to vote. The civil rights debate isn't a purely partisan issue. It's more of a regional issue, with Northerners from both parties supporting it and Southerners from both parties opposing it. Then, in 1964, it's Democratic President Lyndon Johnson who signs the Civil Rights Act into law. And it's Republican presidential nominee Barry Goldwater who opposes it, arguing that it expands government power too much. A massive switch-up takes place. Black voters, some of whom had already been shifting from the Republican Party, convert almost entirely to their new advocates, the Democrats. The white voters in the South, who had been staunch Democrats, start to really resent the big government interference here and in other matters like abortion rights and school prayer. Over the next 3 decades, whites in the South switch to the GOP, which makes the South an overwhelmingly Republican region. By the 1980s, the party begins to resemble the GOP we are familiar with today. Republicans elect Ronald Reagan, who promises to fight for business interests, lower taxes, and traditional family values. As the 21st century begins, America is going through a major demographic shift in the form of Hispanic immigration, both legal and illegal. Democrats and business elites tend to support reforming immigration laws so that the over 10 million unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. would get legal status. On the Republican side, tough on immigration policies and rhetoric became popular. But this ends up costing the Republicans when, in 2012, Mitt Romney loses his bid for the presidency. He gets blown out among Hispanic voters. Exit polls showed that 71% of them voted for Barack Obama. So the Republican Party starts to look more like a party for white voters in an increasingly non-white country. Given these demographic trends, Republican leaders worry that if they keep losing Hispanic voters by that much, they'll lose their chances of ever winning the presidency. So in 2013, some key Republicans in the Senate, including the rising star Marco Rubio, collaborate with Democrats on an immigration reform bill that would give unauthorized immigrants a path to legal status. But there's a huge backlash from the Republican Party's predominantly white base, which views the bill as amnesty for immigrants who broke the rules. This exacerbates the GOP voters' mistrust in their own party leaders, a mistrust that has already been growing for some time. And that makes the political landscape of 2015 fertile ground for a figure like Donald Trump, an outsider businessman who wants to build a wall on the border of Mexico. Trump isn't a traditional conservative, but he appealed to the resentment and the mistrust of party leaders that Republican primary voters had, as well as the strong opposition to growing immigration trends. And even though he was loathed by party leaders, he won enough support in the primaries to become the GOP nominee for president. So now, the Republican Party is once again at a major crossroads as it tries to meet the political challenges of the 21st century. It's up to Republican voters and leaders to decide just what they want their party to be.
And so, Martinez, you can pretty much see it's a pretty interesting video, isn't it? I found that video down on YouTube, and I thought to myself, I definitely got to show Martin this. It's so that you can be able to understand exactly like where this is coming from, like these parties, like how they were created and for what reasons, you know. And given the kinds of circumstances, the kind of political, social circumstances, exactly how they came to be, and how they were before and how they are now. So let's talk about that for just 1 second. So focus on this first picture, as you can see, between Abraham Lincoln and Donald Trump. Yeah, I know. It's like, I mean, when you really think about it, I mean, is Abraham Lincoln actually similar to a person like Donald Trump, right? Let me ask you this first question based on this first picture. What kinds of obvious differences do you think Abraham Lincoln had compared to a person like Donald Trump? That's the first question, okay? So, think about that for just 1 second. And now in this second picture, as you can see here, it's the differences between the Whigs and the Democrats, right? So my second question to you is, exactly how did the Whigs become an invalid party? Like, I mean, how did they become obsolete? What was the reason that they had to change their name into Republicans? Okay, so think about that. I also want you to respond to that. Okay, and in this next one, the question is basically, what was the reason why the Southern states became the Confederate States of America? Why did they want to split from the entire Union? What was the whole reason there? And also, what did Abraham Lincoln try to do in the process after the Southern states tried to become the Confederate States of America? Okay, so that's another thing that I want you to respond to. Remember that you have to send me responses to everything that I'm saying, okay? This is a video that, as I had said before, were given to students in terms of cancellations and things like that, right? So this is a video that I wanted to send you based on politics, based on history, based on lots of different kinds of things that we can talk about in our classes. So you have to send me responses to this. I expect responses in my mail. Okay, bye. Next, with this kind of picture, let's talk about exactly why big business started taking over the Republican Party. Like, what was that all about? I mean, just because Abraham Lincoln got assassinated, that means that big business has to take over the entire Republican Party? Explain that to me, please. This is a really interesting one. Okay. I know this wasn't explained in the video, but what I do want you to try and figure out is, well, not figure out, but I want you to tell me is, who was Martin Luther King and exactly what kinds of changes did he make during the 50s and the 60s in the South? Was he successful, do you think? And what were the kinds of results that the United States had in the process of that? I mean, in terms of not just Barack Obama, but everything else in general. What do you think? And with this last video, I take my hat off to you. As you can see, I don't have my hat. I take my hat off to you because congratulations, you're finished with this video! Your first video training class, virtual video class. I sometimes put the word training in there. I don't understand why I do that. First virtual video class. Congratulations, you're finished. And with that, let's take a look at this picture that we have here, okay? First, this is in a picture which describes what the GOP thinks of itself and what the rest of the world and the country thinks of the GOP. Do you agree with it? Do you really believe that the GOP is becoming, a party that is just too old, it's too white, and it's too outdated? What exactly do you think the GOP, the GOP means government of the people? What do you think the GOP needs to do, or the Republican Party? Sorry, that's another way of referring to it, the GOP or the Republican Party. What do you think they need to do in order for them to be much more taken into account in our American politics right now? And also, in that article, as you can see, there are like maybe 3 or 4 different kinds of vocabulary words that I would like you to try and highlight. And I want you to investigate a little bit about those kinds of vocabulary words. And if you can, try and use those vocabulary words in this question that I'm asking you right now. Okay? So, Martin, once again, congratulations. I'm happy to see that you took the time to check out this video. And I'm happy to see that you clicked on YouTube so that you can download it. And as you can see, you can check it out anytime you want. And if there's absolutely anything else that I can do for you, you just let us know, okay? We hope to be able to talk to you soon, and whenever you want to continue with your classes again, there's absolutely no problem. You can let us know, and we can see what we can do for you in terms of scheduling and everything, okay? I hope you have a great day. Say hello to your family. Take care. Bye.